I was 5 years old. I spoke my language fluently. I don't like to use the word incarcerated, but I was in residential school for 9 years of my life, and I lost my language, and so that educational concern was with me all my life. It always haunted me.
Indigenous children and students in the Yukon are not succeeding at school like non-Indigenous students. To understand why, we have to look back to the time when residential schools were shutting down.
All the other districts at that time when residential schools were closing down, the Government of Canada was signing that back over to the respective First Nations. In Yukon, they gave the responsibility and authority of education for Indigenous children to the territorial government without talking to the First Nations.
It would be decades before the Yukon First Nations would start to be involved in the education system, driven by reports like Together Today for Our Children Tomorrow, as well as self-government agreements and many, many others. Yukon First Nations began to make demands to regain authority over the education of our children.
It was the final meeting that we were having in that consultation at the end of the 2-year period, all 14 First Nations in the room. And it was Chief Simon Mervyn stood up in that room without a microphone or anything, and he said, "You guys need to listen to me." And he quieted the entire room. And he said, if we're going to go down this path, we have to reestablish the Chiefs Committee on Education.
Somehow we got to get a plan together to work together and stay together as First Nations people.
But now the tide is turning for Yukon First Nations students. In recent years, there has been a dramatic shift and positive things are happening. The first step was to establish the Yukon First Nations Education Directorate in 2020. They would begin to deliver Jordan's Principle, wraparound services to all Indigenous kids in the Yukon.
Our students seeing themselves in education only ensures that they do go further, that they are more comfortable, and it definitely takes a community. And I think the Yukon First Nation Education Directorate is that community.
This would include nutritious meals in all schools, a First Nations education advocate team to provide cultural and academic supports, a wellness team devoted to connecting with youth in the communities, an allied health team of therapists, as well as an early years program for parents, children 0 to 5, and their families.
I really wanted to make sure that the organization itself would not be another model of a colonial organization. It would be a model of an Indigenous organization that would come from an Indigenous lens.
Now that we get to do this kind of stuff on the land, and we are honoring our elders now, our elders that was here before us.
The second step in the CCOE's action plan was to create the First Nations School Board in 2021. Across the territory, people voted on whether they wanted their schools to join the board, enabling Yukon First Nations to assume shared authority with Government of Yukon in the delivery of public school education. 11 schools eventually joined the board.
I think it was a dream in the making for so long. Having that powerful voice at the table to help indigenize the curriculum and, bring our heritage and our culture into schools for our students.
The third step in the CCOE's plan was to negotiate funding agreements with both the Government of Canada and the Government of Yukon.
With Yukon government, it was about getting the community values on what they see in their community as this is important for education, and lining those up appropriately with line budget items that Yukon government has, which is not an easy task.
Everybody is at the table, and on the Chiefs Committee on Education, we do have self-governing nations as well as the non-self-governing, and we also need to ensure that they have a voice, and it's so incredibly important that they are part of the committee.
But for now, Indigenous students all across the Yukon are feeling the positive changes. In 5 short years, the CCOE has brought about a revolution in education, one that is transforming the entire education system for the benefit of all our children.
they're just like a sponge, you know, they're just soaking this all up and they want to learn more about it.
I see the changes in them from when I started with them. They're going to be the next leaders. That's why we're teaching them.
I can see happiness. I can see the love of pursuit. I can see the interest coming back in them through the efforts of YFNED.
The work we do is on behalf of our Indigenous children in the territory. And to me, as an educator, there's nothing more honorable than that.
Could we say thank you in our languages?
Yes, please.
Say yours first. Masicho. Thank you.
Way, yo.